The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as soldiers gathered for the weekly briefing. Sergeant Major Williams stood at attention, his weathered face scanning the assembled troops. The routine was always the same: roll call, mission updates, and introductions of new personnel. But this Tuesday would be different from any other in his 30-year military career. "Listen up, soldiers," Williams barked, his voice carrying across the formation. "We have a new addition to our unit today. Staff Sergeant Martinez will be joining the 82nd Combat Support Battalion." The heavy wooden doors of the briefing hall creaked open, and conversations died to whispers. A woman walked through the entrance with measured steps, her uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. At first glance, she appeared unremarkable: average height, dark hair pulled back in regulation style, and the kind of composed expression that suggested military discipline. The assembled soldiers barely looked up from their morning coffee and clipboards. Private Johnson, fresh out of basic training, nudged his buddy. "Another desk jockey getting assigned to combat support," he muttered under his breath. "Probably spent her whole career filing paperwork at some cushy base." Corporal Davis, a mechanic with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, glanced over dismissively. "Yeah, looks like the kind who's never seen real action. Bet she's here because someone pulled strings to get her a promotion track." But Master Sergeant Thompson, a 20-year veteran with tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, felt something different as he watched her approach. There was something in her stride, not the uncertain gait of someone trying to prove themselves, but the careful, measured movement of someone who had learned that survival often depended on reading a room before entering it. Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez stopped precisely 6 feet from Sergeant Major Williams and snapped to attention. Her salute was textbook perfect, held for exactly the right duration. As she lowered her hand, something caught the light on her dress uniform, a glint of metal that made several of the more experienced soldiers straighten in their seats. "Staff Sergeant Martinez reporting for duty, Sergeant Major," she said, her voice clear and steady. Williams returned the salute and gestured for her to turn and face the formation. "Martinez comes to us from the 75th Ranger Regiment," he announced. "She'll be taking over logistics coordination for our upcoming deployment to Syria." A few eyebrows raised at the mention of the Rangers, but most soldiers were still focused on their breakfast or checking their phones. The 75th Ranger Regiment was elite, but logistics personnel weren't typically the door-kickers who earned legendary status. As Martinez turned to face her new unit, the morning light streaming through the windows illuminated her dress uniform more clearly. That's when Master Sergeant Thompson's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. His eyes locked onto the ribbon rack above her left breast pocket, and his breath caught in his throat. The ribbons were arranged in perfect rows, each one representing a specific achievement, deployment, or act of valor. But it wasn't just the number of ribbons that made Thompson's pulse quicken, it was their combination and what they represented when read together like chapters in a book written in blood and sacrifice. At the top sat the Silver Star, its red, white, and blue ribbon with the Silver Star in the center. Thompson knew that medal wasn't handed out for excellence in logistics or administrative achievement. The Silver Star was awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. It was the third highest military decoration for valor, given only to those who had faced death and somehow found the courage to charge forward anyway. To its right was the Bronze Star Medal with V device for valor, its red, white, and blue stripes indicating another act of heroism under fire. Thompson had seen grown men break down when receiving bronze stars, the weight of what they'd endured finally catching up with them in the safety of a ceremony. Below those sat the Purple Heart, its purple ribbon with white edges, a somber reminder that Martinez had bled for her country. The Purple Heart wasn't something you earned through training or dedication. It was something that happened to you when an enemy's bullet or shrapnel found its mark and you were lucky enough to survive. But Thompson's trained eye caught something even more significant. There, among the rows of ribbons, was the Combat Infantryman Badge, a distinctive blue rectangle with a silver rifle surrounded by a wreath. This badge was only awarded to infantry and special forces soldiers who had engaged in ground combat. Logistics personnel, no matter how dedicated or skilled, didn't earn combat infantryman badges unless they had stepped far outside their normal duties and into harm's way. The Ranger tab on her shoulder suddenly made sense in a completely different context. Thompson realized that Martinez hadn't been some support person attached to the Rangers, she had been a Ranger, one of the elite soldiers who conducted the most dangerous missions in the most hostile territories. As his eyes continued to scan her ribbon rack, Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. The Afghanistan Campaign Medal with multiple service stars indicated numerous deployments to one of the most dangerous theaters of operation. The Iraq Campaign Medal told a similar story. The Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal suggested operations in other hostile locations around the world. But it was the combination of all these decorations that painted a picture Thompson was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just a soldier who had served with distinction, this was someone who had repeatedly volunteered for the most dangerous missions, someone who had faced death so many times that courage had become a habit. The whispered conversations around the formation began to die as other observant soldiers started noticing what Thompson had seen. Word spread through the ranks like wildfire, passed in subtle glances and raised eyebrows. The dismissive attitude that had greeted Martinez's arrival was rapidly being replaced by something approaching awe. Sergeant Major Williams, oblivious to the changing mood in the room, continued with his introduction. Martinez has extensive experience in combat logistics and will be instrumental in ensuring our supply lines remain secure during deployment. She's also qualified as a marksmanship instructor and has volunteered to help upgrade our unit's weapons training. Private Johnson, who had made the crack about desk jockeys, felt his face flush red as he realized how wrong his assumption had been. Corporal Davis found himself studying Martinez with new eyes, wondering what stories lay behind those ribbons and why someone with her qualifications was being assigned to their relatively mundane unit. Master Sergeant Thompson leaned over to Staff Sergeant Brooks, who was sitting next to him. "Take a good look at that ribbon rack," he whispered. "That's not your typical logistics coordinator." Brooks squinted at Martinez's uniform and felt his mouth go dry. As a 10-year veteran with 2 tours in Iraq, he knew what he was looking at. The ribbon rack told a story of combat, sacrifice, and survival that most soldiers would never experience. It was the kind of record that belonged to someone who had seen the absolute worst of warfare and somehow found the strength to keep fighting. The briefing continued, but the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. Soldiers who had been checking their phones were now sitting at attention, studying the woman who stood calmly before them. There was something in her posture, in the way she held herself, that suggested depths of experience that most of them could barely imagine. Martinez seemed unaware of the scrutiny she was receiving. She stood at parade rest, her eyes focused straight ahead, displaying the kind of discipline that came from years of training and combat experience. There was no hint of pride or arrogance in her demeanor, just the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. As the briefing moved on to other topics, Thompson found himself studying Martinez's face. There were no obvious scars, no dramatic signs of the battle she had fought. But there was something in her eyes, a particular quality that Thompson had seen in other combat veterans who had been tested beyond their limits and emerged changed but unbroken. The formation was dismissed, and soldiers began filing out of the hall. But instead of the usual rush to get to their assignments, many lingered, stealing glances at Martinez as she spoke quietly with Sergeant Major Williams. The word was spreading through the unit faster than gossip in a small town. The new logistics coordinator wasn't what she appeared to be. Thompson approached Martinez as she finished her conversation with Williams. "Staff Sergeant," he said, extending his hand. "Master Sergeant Thompson, Operations. Welcome to the unit." Martinez shook his hand with a firm grip. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. I'm looking forward to working with everyone." "That's quite a ribbon rack you've got there," Thompson said carefully. "Silver Star doesn't usually come with logistics assignments." For the first time, Martinez's composed expression flickered slightly. "The Army puts you where they need you," she replied simply. "Previous experience doesn't always determine current assignments." Thompson nodded, recognizing the deflection for what it was. He had known enough combat veterans to understand that some experiences weren't easily discussed, especially not in casual conversation with someone you'd just met. But his curiosity was burning, and he couldn't help but wonder what had brought someone with Martinez's background to their relatively quiet unit. Over the next few hours, as Martinez was processed through in-briefs and shown to her new office, the story of her ribbon rack spread throughout the base. Soldiers who had never paid attention to such things were suddenly experts in military decorations, explaining to anyone who would listen what the Silver Star meant and why its presence on Martinez's uniform was so significant. By lunchtime, the base commissary was buzzing with speculation. Some soldiers claimed she had been a sniper who had taken out high-value targets behind enemy lines. Others suggested she had been part of a special operations unit that conducted classified missions in denied territory. The stories grew more elaborate with each telling, but they all centered around one undeniable fact: Staff Sergeant Martinez had done something extraordinary in combat, and now she was among them. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the unit commander, called Sergeant Major Williams into his office that afternoon. "What do you know about this Martinez?" he asked, pulling up her personnel file on his computer. Williams consulted his notes. "Transferred from the 75th Ranger Regiment, sir. Excellent performance reports, highly recommended for the position. She's supposed to take over logistics for the Syria deployment." Hayes scrolled through the digital version of Martinez's record, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Her combat record is extensive," he said finally. "Multiple deployments to high-threat environments. Several commendations for valor. I'm wondering why someone with her background is being assigned to logistics coordination." "Could be she requested a less hazardous assignment, sir," Williams suggested. "Some soldiers want to step back from the sharp end after enough combat tours." Hayes nodded, but something in Martinez's file troubled him. Her performance reports were flawless, her recommendations glowing. There was no indication of problems or issues that would necessitate a transfer away from special operations. If anything, she appeared to be exactly the kind of soldier the Rangers would want to keep. "I want you to keep an eye on her," Hayes told Williams. "Not because I suspect problems, but because soldiers with her background sometimes have adjustment issues when they move to conventional units. Make sure she's integrating well." Meanwhile, Martinez was settling into her new office, reviewing supply manifests and deployment schedules. The work was familiar. She had managed logistics for Ranger operations, though the stakes here were considerably lower. No one was depending on her calculations to survive a firefight behind enemy lines. No one would die if a supply drop was delayed by a few hours. But, even as she focused on her paperwork, Martinez was aware of the attention her arrival had generated. She had seen the looks, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she passed by. She knew exactly what they were looking at on her uniform, and she understood the curiosity it generated. The truth was more complicated than the stories they were probably telling each other. Yes, she had earned those medals. Yes, she had served with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But the reasons for her transfer to this unit were personal and complex, involving decisions and sacrifices that she wasn't ready to discuss with strangers. As the day wore on, Martinez received visits from various members of her new unit. Most came under the pretense of introducing themselves or offering assistance, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes. They wanted to know her story, wanted to understand how someone with her background had ended up in their midst. She handled each interaction with professional courtesy, providing the minimum information necessary while deflecting personal questions. It was a skill she had developed over years of dealing with military bureaucracy and overly curious colleagues. But she could sense that the interest in her background wasn't going to fade quickly. That evening, as Martinez headed to her temporary quarters on base, she noticed small groups of soldiers pointing in her direction and talking in hushed tones. The attention made her uncomfortable, but it wasn't unexpected. Military communities were small, and news traveled fast. She had hoped for a quieter integration, but she knew that her ribbon rack made anonymity impossible. In her room that night, Martinez sat on her narrow bed and looked at herself in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The woman staring back at her wore the same face she had seen for 30 years, but the eyes were different now. They carried memories that couldn't be shared, experiences that couldn't be explained to people who hadn't lived them. She thought about the silver star pinned to her dress uniform, locked away in her closet. Most people saw it as a symbol of heroism, a mark of extraordinary courage under fire. But, for Martinez, it was a reminder of the worst day of her life, the day when everything she thought she knew about herself and her capabilities was tested in ways she had never imagined possible. The bronze star represented a different kind of memory, not a single moment of crisis, but a sustained period of operations where survival had depended on quick thinking, tactical skill, and no small amount of luck. The Purple Heart was perhaps the most painful reminder of all, representing not just physical wounds but the psychological scars that came with being hurt far from home in service of something larger than herself. As she prepared for sleep, Martinez wondered how long it would be before someone worked up the courage to ask her directly about her combat experience. She had dealt with curious colleagues before, but this felt different somehow. This unit was going to be her home for the foreseeable future, and these people were going to be depending on her to do her job effectively. She made a mental note to schedule individual meetings with key personnel over the next few days. Building relationships and establishing trust would be essential for mission success, regardless of whatever stories were circulating about her background. She had learned long ago that the best way to handle curiosity was with transparency, but only when and how she chose to provide it. Outside her window, Fort Braxton settled into its nighttime routine. Guards walked their posts, duty personnel monitored communications, and the vast majority of soldiers slept peacefully in their beds, protected by the knowledge that they were safe within the boundaries of the base. For Martinez, sleep had become a more complicated proposition over the years. Combat deployments had changed her relationship with rest, making her hyper-aware of sounds and movements that civilian populations took for granted. But she had developed coping strategies, routines that helped her mind transition from the heightened alertness that had kept her alive in hostile territory to the relative peace required for restoration. As she finally drifted off, Martinez's last conscious thought was about the mission ahead. Syria would be another combat deployment, another opportunity to serve her country and protect her fellow soldiers. The difference this time was that she would be doing it from a logistics perspective rather than as a direct combatant. She wasn't sure yet whether that represented a step forward in her career or a step back from the life she had built for herself. But she was certain that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was prepared to face them with the same dedication and professionalism that had carried her through every previous assignment. The story of Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez was just beginning to unfold at Fort Braxton, but already the foundation was being laid for something extraordinary. The soldiers who had dismissed her as another administrative transfer were about to learn that some people carry their worth in ways that aren't immediately apparent, and that true strength often comes disguised as quiet competence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances to build the relationships that would be essential for mission success. But tonight, as Martinez finally found sleep, she was simply one more soldier preparing to serve her country, carrying with her the accumulated weight of experiences that had shaped her into someone extraordinary, even if she would never describe herself that way. The second week at Fort Braxton brought unexpected challenges for Staff Sergeant Martinez. While she had successfully integrated into the logistics operations, managing supply chains and coordinating equipment transfers with her characteristic efficiency, the curiosity about her background had only intensified among the troops. Master Sergeant Thompson had been watching Martinez carefully since her arrival, not out of suspicion but from genuine professional interest. He had served long enough to recognize the subtle signs that marked combat veterans who had seen serious action. Martinez displayed all of them: the way she unconsciously positioned herself with her back to walls during meetings, her habit of scanning rooms upon entering, and the particular stillness she maintained when listening to others speak. On Wednesday morning, Thompson found an opportunity to approach Martinez during a brief lull in the morning's activities. She was reviewing supply manifests in her office, her attention focused completely on the task at hand. Thompson knocked on the doorframe and waited for her acknowledgement before entering. "Staff Sergeant, you got a minute?" Thompson asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Martinez looked up from her paperwork and nodded. "Of course, Master Sergeant. What can I help you with?" Thompson studied her face for a moment, noting the alert intelligence in her eyes and the slight tension around her mouth that suggested she was prepared for whatever conversation was coming. "I've been in the Army for 20 years, he began carefully. "Served in Iraq twice, Afghanistan once. I've seen enough combat to recognize someone who's been there too." Martinez set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk. "I appreciate your service, Master Sergeant. The thing is," Thompson continued, "the troops are curious about you. That ribbon rack tells quite a story, and people are wondering why someone with your background is here with us instead of still running missions with the Rangers." For a long moment, Martinez didn't respond. Thompson could see her weighing her words, deciding how much to reveal and how much to keep private. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and careful. "Sometimes soldiers reach a point where they need to make different choices about their service," she said. "My previous assignments were demanding. The Army has been good enough to give me an opportunity to contribute in a different way." Thompson leaned forward slightly. "That silver star didn't come from supply chain management." Martinez's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "No, it didn't." The silence stretched between them for several seconds before Thompson decided to try a different approach. "The troops respect what you've accomplished. But they're also trying to figure out how to work with someone who's clearly operated at a level most of us have never experienced. Some of them are intimidated." This seemed to catch Martinez's attention in a way that direct questions about her background hadn't. "Intimidated? Why?" "Because they're wondering if their best efforts are going to measure up to someone who's earned that kind of recognition. Private Johnson hasn't been able to make eye contact with you since he saw your ribbons. Corporal Davis keeps asking other people questions about procedures instead of coming to you directly." Martinez frowned, clearly troubled by this information. "That's not what I want. I'm here to do a job, same as everyone else." "I know that," Thompson said. "But perception is reality in the military. If the troops see you as some kind of superhero, they're not going to interact with you normally. And that's going to make your job a lot harder." Martinez was quiet for a moment, considering this. Thompson could see her mind working through the implications of what he had told her. Finally, she looked up at him with an expression that seemed to contain equal parts resignation and determination. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "Maybe share a little bit about your background. Not the classified stuff, but enough so people understand you're human. Help them see that you're approachable." Martinez shook her head immediately. "I don't talk about my deployments." "I'm not asking you to give a war story presentation," Thompson said. "But maybe find some way to connect with the troops that doesn't involve them having to guess about who you are and what you've done." Before Martinez could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway outside her office. Raised voices and the sound of running feet suggested some kind of emergency. Both sergeants were on their feet immediately, their military training kicking in automatically. They reached the hallway to find Private Johnson on the ground, conscious but clearly in distress. Several soldiers had gathered around him, but no one seemed to know what to do. Corporal Davis was kneeling next to Johnson, trying to get information about what had happened. "He just collapsed," Davis explained as Thompson and Martinez approached. "Said his chest hurt and then went down." Martinez moved through the gathered soldiers with quiet authority, kneeling beside Johnson and beginning a rapid assessment. Her movements were calm and efficient, displaying medical training that went well beyond basic first aid. She checked Johnson's pulse, examined his eyes, and asked a series of pointed questions about his symptoms. "Has he been under any unusual stress lately?" Martinez asked Davis while maintaining her examination of Johnson. "He's been pretty worried about the upcoming deployment," Davis replied. "Hasn't been sleeping well." Martinez nodded and continued her assessment. Within moments, she had determined that Johnson was experiencing what appeared to be a panic attack rather than a medical emergency, but she continued to monitor his vital signs while talking him through breathing exercises. "Johnson, I need you to focus on my voice," she said calmly. "We're going to slow your breathing down. In through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through your mouth for 4. The gathered soldiers watched in amazement as Martinez worked with Johnson, her voice steady and reassuring as she guided him through techniques to control his panic response. Within 5 minutes, Johnson's breathing had normalized and the color had returned to his face. "Better?" Martinez asked, helping Johnson sit up slowly. Johnson nodded, embarrassment now replacing panic in his expression. "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant. I don't know what happened." "Nothing to apologize for," Martinez replied matter-of-factly. "Panic attacks happen. You're going to be fine." As the crowd dispersed and Johnson was helped to his feet, Thompson remained behind with Martinez. He had been impressed not just by her medical skills, but by the way she had taken charge of the situation without drama or self-importance. "That was well handled," Thompson said. Martinez shrugged. "Basic medical training. Every ranger learns how to deal with stress reactions. Most rangers don't have that kind of bedside manner," Thompson observed. For the first time since he had met her, Martinez allowed herself a slight smile. "I spent some time as a combat medic before I moved to other specialties. You learn that sometimes taking care of people is as important as completing the mission." This small revelation opened a door that Thompson had been trying to find for days. "Combat medic explains some things. That's where you learn to stay calm under pressure." Martinez's expression became more guarded again, but she didn't shut down the conversation entirely. Medical training helps in a lot of situations. Over the following days, word of how Martinez had handled Johnson's panic attack spread through the unit. Soldiers who had been intimidated by her ribbon rack began to see her differently. She had demonstrated competence and compassion in equal measure, showing that her combat experience hadn't made her cold or unapproachable. Johnson himself became one of Martinez's strongest supporters in the unit. He sought her out to thank her for her help and to ask questions about managing deployment stress. Martinez found herself becoming an informal counselor for soldiers dealing with pre-deployment anxiety, a role she accepted without complaint but with some private amusement at how far removed it was from her previous assignments. The change in unit dynamics became apparent during the weekly training exercises. Soldiers who had previously avoided direct interaction with Martinez began seeking her input on procedures and asking for advice on various aspects of their jobs. Her knowledge of logistics was extensive, but, more importantly, her combat experience gave her insights into what supplies and equipment were truly essential versus what was merely convenient to have. During one particularly challenging training scenario, the unit was tasked with establishing a forward operating base in simulated hostile territory. The exercise was designed to test their ability to coordinate logistics under pressure while maintaining security and communications. Martinez found herself in the position of observing the exercise rather than leading it, which gave her a unique perspective on how the unit functioned under stress. What she saw concerned her. The soldiers were competent and well-trained, but they lacked the kind of tactical awareness that could mean the difference between life and death in an actual combat environment. When the exercise concluded, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes asked for Martinez's assessment. She had been reluctant to offer criticism of procedures that were already established, but the safety implications of what she had observed outweighed her desire to avoid conflict. "The perimeter security is inadequate," Martinez said bluntly during the after-action review. The guard positions don't provide adequate coverage, and the rotation schedule leaves gaps that could be exploited. Captain Morrison, who had designed the exercise, bristled at the criticism. Those procedures are standard Army doctrine. Standard doctrine assumes a certain level of threat, Martinez replied calmly. In Syria, we'll be dealing with irregular forces who don't follow conventional tactics. The security setup I observed today would have been compromised within hours in any of the environments where I've served. The room fell silent as officers and senior NCOs processed this assessment. Finally, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes spoke up. What do you recommend? Martinez moved to the map board and began sketching modifications to the perimeter layout. As she explained her reasoning, it became clear that she was drawing on extensive experience with base security in hostile environments. Her recommendations were detailed, practical, and based on hard-learned lessons about how insurgent forces operated. The key is overlapping fields of fire and redundant observation posts, Martinez explained. You want to make it impossible for anyone to approach without being seen from at least two positions. And your guard rotation needs to be unpredictable. If there's a pattern, someone will figure it out and exploit it. Captain Morrison found himself taking notes as Martinez outlined her suggested modifications. Despite his initial defensiveness, he recognized that she was offering insights that could potentially save lives during their upcoming deployment. Master Sergeant Thompson watched this exchange with growing respect for Martinez's tactical knowledge. It was becoming clear that her combat experience extended far beyond medical training or even conventional ranger operations. The depth of her understanding of base security suggested someone who had been responsible for protecting other soldiers in extremely dangerous environments. After the meeting concluded, Thompson approached Martinez once again. That was impressive. You've clearly spent time thinking about force protection in hostile environments. Martinez was gathering her notes and didn't look up immediately. It's important to get it right. How many bases have you been responsible for securing? Thompson asked. Martinez paused in her organizing and looked at him directly. Enough to know what happens when you get it wrong. There was something in her tone that suggested personal experience with the consequences of inadequate security. Thompson didn't press for details, but he filed away this piece of information as another part of the puzzle that was Staff Sergeant Martinez. That evening, Martinez found herself in the unusual position of being approached by junior soldiers seeking advice. Word had spread about her recommendations for improving base security, and several NCOs wanted to understand more about threat assessment in combat environments. She held an informal session in one of the empty classrooms, going over basic principles of tactical awareness and force protection. As she spoke, Martinez found herself drawing on memories and experiences that she had tried to keep locked away since her transfer. The most important thing to understand, she told the assembled soldiers, is that in a combat environment, there are no routine operations. Every convoy, every patrol, every time you leave the wire, someone might be planning to kill you. Your survival depends on never letting your guard down and always assuming the worst-case scenario. Private Rodriguez raised his hand. How do you maintain that level of alertness without burning out? Martinez considered the question carefully. It becomes habit. Your mind learns to compartmentalize the stress while staying focused on the mission. But it takes time to develop that skill, and it's different for everyone. What about dealing with the fear? Asked Corporal Williams. Fear is useful, Martinez replied. It keeps you alive. The trick is learning to function effectively while scared instead of trying to eliminate the fear entirely. As the session continued, Martinez found herself sharing insights that she had accumulated through years of combat operations. She was careful not to reveal classified information or specific details about her deployments, but she was able to provide practical advice that could help these soldiers survive their upcoming tour in Syria. When the informal training session ended, several soldiers approached Martinez individually to ask follow-up questions. She was surprised to find that teaching felt natural to her, almost like a return to something she had done before, but in a different context. Master Sergeant Thompson had attended the session from the back of the room, observing both Martinez's teaching style and the reaction of the soldiers. He was impressed by her ability to convey complex tactical concepts in simple, understandable terms. More importantly, he could see that she genuinely cared about helping these soldiers prepare for the dangers they would face. After everyone else had left, Thompson approached Martinez once more. "That was good. Really good. Have you done much teaching before?" Martinez was erasing the whiteboard, her back to Thompson. "Some. When you're in special operations, you end up training other units sometimes. The troops responded well to you tonight. They trust your expertise." Martinez turned around and leaned against the whiteboard. For the first time since her arrival, she looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained in a way that suggested the evening's discussion had cost her something. "They shouldn't put too much stock in what I have to say," Martinez said quietly. "Experience doesn't guarantee success. Sometimes good soldiers die despite doing everything right." Thompson recognized the tone of someone who had lost people under their command. It was a burden that many combat leaders carried, the weight of decisions that had life or death consequences. "You can't save everyone," he said simply. Martinez's expression remained neutral, but Thompson could see that his words had hit home. "I know that. But it doesn't make it easier." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Martinez gathered her materials and headed for the door. Thompson watched her go, reflecting on what he had learned about her over the past few days. The pieces were starting to come together, painting a picture of someone who had carried significant responsibility in combat and who was still processing the weight of those experiences. As Martinez walked back to her quarters, she found herself thinking about the soldiers she had spoken with that evening. They were eager to learn, receptive to instruction, and genuinely concerned about performing well during their deployment. In many ways, they reminded her of other soldiers she had known, other young men and women who had been preparing for their first taste of combat. The difference was that this time, Martinez wouldn't be going with them into harm's way. She would be supporting them from a logistics perspective, ensuring they had the equipment and supplies they needed, but she wouldn't be there to watch their backs or make tactical decisions that could keep them alive. It was a strange feeling, this transition from direct combat operations to support duties. Part of her felt relieved to be stepping back from the constant stress of life or death decision-making. But another part of her worried about letting go of the control that had helped her keep soldiers alive in previous deployments. As she settled into her room for the night, Martinez allowed herself to think about the path that had brought her to Fort Braxton. The decision to leave special operations hadn't been easy, and she still wasn't entirely certain it had been the right choice. But interactions like tonight's training session suggested that she might be able to contribute to soldier safety in ways she hadn't previously considered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to build relationships with her unit. The curiosity about her background wasn't going to disappear overnight, but perhaps she was beginning to find ways to share her experience that could benefit others without requiring her to relive the most difficult memories of her service. For now, that felt like progress. 3 weeks into her assignment at Fort Braxton, Staff Sergeant Martinez faced her first real test of leadership in her new role. The unit had been selected for an accelerated deployment schedule, moving their Syria departure up by 2 months due to emerging operational requirements. This compressed timeline meant that all logistics planning had to be completed in half the originally allocated time. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called an emergency meeting for 0600 hours on Monday morning. The conference room was packed with officers and senior NCOs, all of whom looked like they had been pulled away from their first cup of coffee to deal with whatever crisis was unfolding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began without preamble, "we've received orders to deploy to Syria 6 weeks earlier than planned. This accelerated timeline presents significant logistical challenges that we need to address immediately." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled personnel. Major Franklin, the operations officer, raised his hand. Sir, what's driving the accelerated timeline? Intelligence reports suggest increased activity from Iranian-backed militias in our assigned sector, Hayes replied. Command wants us in position to reinforce existing units before the situation deteriorates further. Captain Morrison leaned forward in his seat. What does this mean for our supply chain coordination? We had another month to finalize equipment manifests and coordinate with transportation. All eyes turned to Martinez, who had been quietly reviewing notes she had taken during the briefing. She looked up to find the entire room waiting for her assessment of whether the accelerated timeline was feasible from a logistics standpoint. Martinez took a moment to consider the implications before responding. The compressed timeline is challenging but manageable if we prioritize correctly and accept some calculated risks. Explain, Hayes said simply. Martinez moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a modified deployment timeline. Our biggest constraint is transportation capacity. We can't move everything at once, so we need to categorize equipment by mission criticality and deploy in waves. As she outlined her approach, it became clear that Martinez was proposing a fundamentally different logistics strategy than what the unit had originally planned. Instead of shipping all equipment as a single package, she suggested breaking the deployment into 3 phases, with the most essential items going first and less critical supplies following as transportation became available. Wave 1 would be personnel, weapons, ammunition, and communications equipment, Martinez explained. Wave 2 would be vehicles, heavy weapons systems, and initial supply stocks. Wave 3 would be comfort items, additional supplies, and non-essential equipment. Major Franklin studied the timeline Martinez had drawn on the board. That approach assumes we can operate effectively with reduced capability during the initial phase. Every deployment starts with reduced capability, Martinez replied matter-of-factly. The key is ensuring you have what you need to survive and fight while you're waiting for everything else to arrive. Captain Morrison looked skeptical. What about maintenance support? We can't deploy vehicles without spare parts and repair facilities. Martinez turned back to the whiteboard and modified her diagram. We deploy with a 30-day maintenance package in Wave 1. Mobile repair teams can handle most issues until the full maintenance capability arrives in Wave 2. The room fell silent as the officers and NCOs absorbed Martinez's proposal. Her approach was more aggressive than the standard Army deployment model, but it was also clearly based on extensive experience with rapid deployments in challenging environments. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes studied the timeline for several minutes before speaking. This plan requires us to take risks that we normally wouldn't accept. Yes, sir, Martinez acknowledged. But the alternative is missing the deployment window entirely, which presents greater risks to mission success. Hayes nodded slowly. I want detailed risk assessments for each phase, along with contingency plans if transportation or other issues arise. Can you have that ready by Wednesday? Yes, sir. As the meeting broke up, Martinez found herself surrounded by subordinates and peers who had questions about various aspects of the accelerated deployment plan. She spent the next hour going over details and explaining the reasoning behind her recommendations. Master Sergeant Thompson waited until the crowd had dispersed before approaching Martinez. That was bold. You're essentially proposing to deploy a combat unit with minimal logistics support. Martinez gathered her notes and looked at him directly. I'm proposing to deploy a combat unit the way combat units actually deploy when the situation requires it. The peacetime model assumes unlimited time and resources. Combat deployment is about accepting calculated risks to achieve mission objectives. How many times have you done this? Thompson asked. Martinez paused in her packing. Done what? Deployed a unit with minimal logistics support in a compressed timeline. For a moment, Martinez seemed to be considering how much to reveal. Finally, she said, enough times to know what you can get away with and what you can't. Thompson sensed that there was much more to the story, but he also recognized that Martinez wasn't ready to share those details. the troops are going to be nervous about deploying without their full equipment package. The troops should be nervous, Martinez replied. Nervous soldiers pay attention and stay alive. Overconfident soldiers make mistakes. Over the next 3 days, Martinez worked 18-hour shifts to develop the detailed logistics plan that Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had requested. She coordinated with transportation units, supply depots, and maintenance facilities to ensure that her proposed deployment timeline was realistic and achievable. The work was complex and demanding, requiring her to balance competing priorities and manage countless variables simultaneously. But Martinez found herself energized by the challenge in a way that routine logistics coordination had never inspired her. As she worked, Martinez drew on knowledge and experience that went far beyond standard Army logistics training. She incorporated lessons learned from rapid deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, techniques for operating with minimal supply lines that she had developed during special operations missions, and contingency planning approaches that reflected deep understanding of how things could go wrong in combat environments. On Wednesday morning, Martinez presented her completed plan to the command staff. The briefing took 2 hours, covering everything from transportation schedules to risk mitigation strategies. Her presentation was thorough, professional, and demonstrated mastery of logistics planning that impressed even skeptical officers. Questions? Martinez asked as she concluded her briefing. Major Franklin raised his hand. What happens if one of the transportation assets is delayed or damaged? The whole timeline depends on precise coordination. Martinez flipped to a backup slide that showed alternative transportation options for each phase of the deployment. Each wave has primary and alternate transportation scheduled. If we lose one asset, we can redistribute the load across remaining platforms with minimal delay. Captain Morrison followed up with his own question. What about maintenance issues with vehicles that deploy in Wave 1? If something breaks down and we don't have repair capability, each vehicle deploys with an emergency repair kit specific to its most common failure modes, Martinez replied. Additionally, each wave includes mobile maintenance teams with the capability to handle most field repairs. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, with Martinez providing detailed answers that demonstrated she had considered virtually every possible contingency. When the session finally concluded, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes looked around the room at his staff. Any objections to proceeding with Staff Sergeant Martinez's plan? Hayes asked. No one spoke up, though several officers still looked concerned about the risks involved. Very well, Hayes concluded. We'll implement the phased deployment approach. Staff Sergeant Martinez will coordinate logistics, with support from Major Franklin's operations team. As the meeting broke up, Martinez felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. Her plan had been accepted, but now she would be responsible for executing a complex deployment under compressed timelines with minimal margin for error. Master Sergeant Thompson caught up with Martinez as she was leaving the conference room. Congratulations! You just volunteered yourself for the most stressful month of your military career. Martinez smiled grimly. It won't be the most stressful month of my military career. Something in her tone made Thompson pause. What was the most stressful? Martinez looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer. Afghanistan, 2018. We had to establish a forward operating base in disputed territory with no supply line and surrounded by hostile forces. 72 hours with no resupply, no reinforcement, and no extraction plan. Thompson felt his mouth go dry. How did that turn out? We held the position until reinforcements arrived, Martinez said simply. But it was close. This was the most specific information Martinez had shared about her combat experience since arriving at Fort Braxton. Thompson recognized it as a significant moment of trust, but he also understood that there was much more to the story than she was willing to tell. That silver star, Thompson said quietly. Martinez nodded once, then gathered her materials and headed for her office without another word. Over the following weeks, Martinez's logistics plan was put into action with military precision. Equipment was prioritized, packaged, and shipped according to her timeline. Personnel were processed and deployed in waves that matched the arrival of their essential equipment. The plan worked exactly as Martinez had predicted. Wave 1 personnel arrived in Syria with everything they needed to establish basic operations. Wave 2 brought the equipment necessary to expand their capabilities. Wave 3 completed the deployment with all remaining supplies and equipment. Throughout this process, Martinez coordinated with multiple agencies and organizations, managing complex schedules and solving problems as they arose. Her performance was flawless, earning praise from superiors and respect from subordinates who had initially been skeptical of her aggressive timeline. But, as the deployment progressed successfully, soldiers in the unit began to realize that Martinez's logistics expertise was based on more than theoretical knowledge. Her ability to anticipate problems and develop solutions suggested someone who had managed similar operations under much more challenging circumstances. Private Johnson, who had experienced the panic attack during Martinez's first week, approached her after one particularly complex coordination session. "Staff Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Johnson. You make this look easy. Like you've done it 1,000 times before." Martinez looked at the young soldier, seeing in his face the same combination of curiosity and respect that she had been encountering throughout the deployment planning process. "Experience helps," she said simply. "How much experience?" Johnson asked. Martinez considered the question carefully. Johnson had been one of the soldiers who had initially dismissed her as just another administrative transfer. His opinion had changed dramatically over the past month, and she could see that he was genuinely trying to understand how she had developed her capabilities. Enough to know that logistics planning can be the difference between mission success and mission failure, Martinez replied. "When soldiers are depending on you to get it right, you find ways to make it work." Johnson nodded, but Martinez could see that her answer hadn't fully satisfied his curiosity. "The other soldiers are saying you used to be in special operations." "I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment," Martinez confirmed. "Doing logistics?" Martinez paused, realizing that Johnson was asking a more specific question than it initially appeared. "Among other things." "What other things?" Martinez looked at Johnson for a long moment, seeing in his eager expression the same desire to understand that she had been encountering from soldiers throughout the unit. Finally, she decided that some level of honesty might be helpful for building the trust that would be essential for mission success. "Rangers do whatever the mission requires," Martinez said carefully. "Sometimes that's logistics. Sometimes it's other specialties." Johnson's eyes widened slightly as he processed the implications of this response. "Like what other specialties?" "Whatever the mission requires," Martinez repeated, making it clear that this line of questioning had reached its limit. Johnson nodded and backed away, but Martinez could see the wheels turning in his mind. Within hours, word would spread throughout the unit that their logistics coordinator had done more than supply chain management during her time with the Rangers. That evening, Martinez sat in her office reviewing the final details of the deployment plan. Everything was on schedule, all equipment had been shipped or was in transit, and personnel were preparing for their departure to Syria. From a professional standpoint, the accelerated deployment had been a complete success. But Martinez found herself thinking about the conversation with Johnson and the growing curiosity among the troops about her background. She had tried to maintain privacy about her combat experience, but the demands of the deployment had required her to demonstrate knowledge and skills that made concealment increasingly difficult. As she prepared to leave her office, Martinez caught sight of her dress uniform hanging in the closet. The ribbon rack that had first attracted attention during her arrival was still there, silent testimony to experiences she had hoped to leave behind. But, perhaps, Martinez thought as she gathered her materials, some experiences weren't meant to be left behind. Perhaps they were meant to be shared in ways that could help other soldiers prepare for their own challenges. tomorrow would bring new demands and new opportunities to serve. The deployment to Syria was just beginning, and there would be countless decisions to make and problems to solve. But tonight, Martinez felt confident that she had successfully managed the most complex logistics challenge of her career while beginning to find her place in a new unit. The soldiers of the 82nd Combat Support Battalion were about to discover that their success in Syria would depend not just on their own training and dedication, but on the hard-won expertise of someone who had learned her lessons in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. 2 months into the Syria deployment, the 82nd Combat Support Battalion had settled into a routine that balanced operational demands with force protection requirements. The forward operating base that Martinez had helped establish was functioning efficiently, with supply lines operating smoothly and equipment maintenance staying current despite the challenging environment. But, on a Tuesday morning in November, everything changed when a convoy carrying medical supplies was attacked 15 kilometers from the base. The incident happened during what should have been a routine resupply mission, on a route that had been used dozens of times without incident. The radio call came in at 0847 hours, crackling with static and the sound of distant gunfire. "Base, this is Convoy 7-2. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack." IED strike followed by small arms fire from multiple positions. In the Tactical Operations Center, controlled chaos erupted as personnel scrambled to coordinate a response. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was in the field visiting another unit, leaving Major Franklin in command of base operations. The responding Quick Reaction Force was already engaged in a different operation, and the nearest helicopter support was 40 minutes away. Martinez was in the supply warehouse when the attack began, but she heard the radio traffic and immediately moved to the operations center. As she entered the facility, she could see Major Franklin coordinating with multiple units simultaneously, trying to organize a rescue operation with limited resources. "Convoy 7-2, what is your status?" Franklin spoke into his headset. "We have 2 vehicles immobilized, multiple wounded. Enemy fire is coming from a compound to our north and scattered positions to the east. We need immediate support." Franklin looked around the operations center, his expression grim. The Quick Reaction Force was engaged 20 kilometers in the opposite direction. The base's remaining personnel were either on essential duties or lacked the training for combat operations. "Sir," interrupted Communications Sergeant Davis, "Convoy 7-2 is requesting permission to abandon their vehicles and attempt to reach the extraction point on foot." Franklin considered this option, but Martinez could see the tactical problems immediately. Moving wounded personnel across open ground under fire would likely result in additional casualties. Martinez stepped forward, her voice calm and professional. "Major Franklin, request permission to speak." Franklin looked at her, clearly stressed by the unfolding situation. "Go ahead, Staff Sergeant." "The convoy's current position puts them in a kill zone," Martinez said, moving to the map display. "If they attempt to move on foot, they'll be exposed to fire from multiple directions. We need to create a diversion that draws enemy attention away from their position." "What kind of diversion?" Franklin asked. Martinez studied the map for several seconds, her mind processing tactical possibilities that drew on years of experience with similar situations. A feint attack on the compound to the north. Small team, high mobility, designed to make the enemy think a larger force is approaching from that direction. Franklin shook his head immediately. "We don't have personnel available for that kind of operation." "I can lead a team," Martinez said simply. The operations center fell silent. Every person present understood what Martinez was proposing, a dangerous combat mission that went far beyond her current duties as a logistics coordinator. "Staff Sergeant, you're not assigned to combat operations," Franklin replied. "The mission requires someone with tactical experience," Martinez said. "I have that experience." Franklin stared at her, clearly torn between operational necessity and concern about sending someone outside their assigned role into combat. "What would you need?" Martinez moved to the personnel roster displayed on the wall. For volunteers with combat training. 2 vehicles with crew-served weapons. Smoke grenades and sufficient ammunition for a 15-minute engagement. The risk level is acceptable given the alternative, Martinez finished. Without intervention, Convoy 72 will suffer additional casualties. Time is critical. Major Franklin looked around the operations center at the faces of his staff. He could see that they recognized the logic of Martinez's proposal, even if they were concerned about the risks involved. Who would volunteer for this mission? Franklin asked. Before anyone else could respond, Master Sergeant Thompson stepped forward. I'll go. Within minutes, 3 additional volunteers had stepped forward: Sergeant Rodriguez from the motor pool, Corporal Williams from communications, and Private First Class Chen from supply. Each of them had combat experience from previous deployments, and each understood the risks they would be accepting. Martinez quickly outlined her tactical plan, using the map display to show approach routes and engagement positions. Her briefing was precise and professional, covering contingencies and escape routes with the kind of detail that suggested extensive experience with similar operations. The objective is to create enough noise and movement to convince the enemy that a significant force is approaching from the north, Martinez explained. We engage for 10 to 15 minutes, then withdraw along this route while Convoy 72 moves to the extraction point. Thompson studied the plan carefully. What if the enemy doesn't take the bait? Then, we adapt and find another way to draw them off, Martinez replied. But, based on the terrain and their current positions, they'll have to respond to a threat from the north. Major Franklin authorized the mission with obvious reluctance, but the continued radio reports from Convoy 72 made it clear that action was necessary. As Martinez and her team prepared their equipment, word of the mission spread through the base with remarkable speed. Soldiers who had initially questioned Martinez's background now watched her prepare for combat with a mixture of awe and concern. Her movements were efficient and methodical as she checked weapons, reviewed maps, and coordinated with her volunteer team. Private Johnson approached Martinez as she was loading ammunition magazines. Staff Sergeant, are you sure about this? Martinez looked up from her equipment. Sometimes the mission requires you to do more than your assigned job. But, you're taking a huge risk. Martinez paused in her preparations and looked at Johnson directly. The soldiers in that convoy took the same risk when they volunteered to serve. Now it's our turn. As Martinez's team departed the base in 2 up-armored vehicles, the operations center maintained constant communication with both the rescue mission and the trapped convoy. The radio chatter provided a real-time narrative of events that kept everyone on base focused on the tactical situation. Rescue team, this is base, Franklin transmitted. Convoy 72 reports continued harassment fire from multiple positions. Copy, base, Martinez's voice came back over the radio. Rescue team is 2 minutes from initial engagement position. In the operations center, personnel gathered around the radio equipment and map displays, following the progress of both the rescue mission and the trapped convoy. The tension was palpable as everyone realized that lives depended on the success of Martinez's plan. At 0923 hours, Martinez's team reached their planned engagement position. The compound that had been identified as an enemy firing position was visible across several hundred meters of open ground, with scattered buildings providing cover for approaching forces. Base, this is rescue team, Martinez transmitted. We have visual contact with the target compound. Beginning diversion operation now. What happened next demonstrated tactical skills that went far beyond anything the base personnel had expected from their logistics coordinator. Martinez coordinated her team's movement and fire in a way that created the impression of a much larger force engaging the compound. The 2 vehicles moved in coordinated bounds, with one providing covering fire while the other advanced. Smoke grenades created concealment for their movements while also suggesting the presence of additional forces. The volume and accuracy of their fire convinced the defenders that they were facing a serious assault rather than a small diversionary force. Convoy 7-2, this is base, Franklin transmitted. Enemy fire has shifted to engage forces attacking from the north. You are clear to move to extraction point. Copy, base, came the reply from the convoy commander. Beginning movement now. For 12 crucial minutes, Martinez's team maintained their diversion while the trapped convoy moved wounded personnel to safety. The radio provided constant updates as both operations unfolded simultaneously, with Martinez demonstrating command abilities that none of her current unit had previously suspected. Rescue team, this is base, Franklin transmitted. Convoy 7-2 has reached the extraction point. You are cleared to withdraw. Martinez's team executed a textbook withdrawal, using smoke and coordinated movement to break contact with enemy forces and return to base. The entire operation had lasted 38 minutes from initial deployment to return, and it had achieved its objective without additional casualties. As Martinez's vehicles rolled through the base gates, they were met by crowds of soldiers who had been following the radio traffic throughout the mission. The successful rescue operation had demonstrated tactical leadership that transformed how the entire unit viewed their logistics coordinator. Major Franklin met Martinez as she dismounted from her vehicle. Outstanding work, Staff Sergeant. That was a textbook diversion operation. Martinez began unloading her equipment, her expression calm and professional despite what she had just accomplished. Thank you, sir. The team performed exceptionally. Where did you learn to plan and execute that kind of operation? Franklin asked. Martinez paused in her equipment check and looked at him directly. Ranger School covers small unit tactics extensively. That went beyond what they teach in Ranger School, Franklin replied. That was special operations level planning and execution. For a moment, Martinez didn't respond. Around them, soldiers were celebrating the successful mission and discussing the tactical skills they had just witnessed. Finally, Martinez set down her equipment and faced Franklin directly. I served as a team leader with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 4 years, she said quietly. My last deployment was Afghanistan, where I led a special reconnaissance team and denied territory. We conducted over 40 missions behind enemy lines. Franklin felt his understanding of Martinez's background shift fundamentally. Reconnaissance team leader. That explains the tactical awareness and command presence. Martinez nodded but didn't elaborate further. However, her admission had been overheard by several nearby soldiers, and within hours the story of her special operations background had spread throughout the base. That evening, Martinez found herself approached by numerous soldiers who wanted to thank her for the rescue mission and to ask questions about special operations tactics. She handled each interaction with professional courtesy, but it was clear that her desire for privacy about her background had become impossible to maintain. Master Sergeant Thompson found Martinez in her office later that night, reviewing after-action reports from the day's mission. That was impressive work today. Your team saved lives. Martinez looked up from her paperwork. The team did their jobs. The mission succeeded because everyone executed their assigned tasks. That's the kind of modesty I'd expect from someone with your background, Thompson said. But don't minimize what you accomplished. That was expert-level tactical leadership under pressure. Martinez leaned back in her chair, looking tired for the first time since Thompson had known her. I did what the situation required. How many times? Thompson asked. How many times what? How many times did you lead missions like that when you were with the Rangers? Martinez was quiet for several seconds before answering. Enough to know that today was relatively straightforward compared to some operations. Thompson studied her expression, seeing hints of experiences that went far beyond what she had revealed. That silver star represents one of those more complicated operations. Martinez's expression hardened slightly, but she nodded once. among other things. Are you willing to talk about it? Martinez shook her head immediately. Some missions are classified. Others are just difficult to discuss. Thompson understood that he had reached the limit of what Martinez was willing to share about her special operations background. But her actions during the rescue mission had demonstrated capabilities that answered many questions while raising others. Over the following days, the successful rescue operation became a defining moment for unit morale and cohesion. Martinez had proven that her expertise extended far beyond logistics coordination, and her willingness to put herself at risk for fellow soldiers had earned respect that transcended rank or assignment. But the mission had also forced Martinez to reveal aspects of her background that she had hoped to keep private. The soldiers who had initially dismissed her as an administrative transfer now understood that they were serving alongside someone with extraordinary combat experience. As the deployment continued, Martinez found herself being consulted on tactical matters that went well beyond her official duties. Her insights into enemy tactics, force protection, and mission planning proved invaluable as the unit faced increasingly complex operational challenges. The transformation in how her unit viewed Martinez was complete, but it had come at the cost of the anonymity she had sought when transferring away from special operations. She was no longer just a logistics coordinator with an impressive ribbon rack, she was a proven combat leader whose expertise could mean the difference between mission success and mission failure. For Martinez, this recognition brought both satisfaction and concern. She had joined the 82nd Combat Support Battalion hoping to serve in a less demanding role that would allow her to step back from the constant stress of life-or-death decision-making. But circumstances had forced her back into exactly the kind of leadership position she had been trying to leave behind. As she prepared for sleep that night, Martinez reflected on the day's events and what they meant for her future with the unit. The successful rescue mission had demonstrated her value as a tactical leader, but it had also made it impossible to maintain the low profile she had sought. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve. The deployment to Syria was far from over, and there would undoubtedly be other situations that would test her skills and judgment. But tonight, Martinez felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that her experience and expertise had made a difference in keeping fellow soldiers alive. The story of Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez was continuing to evolve, shaped by the demands of combat and the loyalty she felt toward those who served alongside her. The woman who had walked into Fort Braxton hoping for a quiet assignment had proven once again that some people are simply destined to lead, regardless of what role they try to fill. The revelation of Martinez's true background following the convoy rescue mission marked a turning point in both her relationship with the unit and her own acceptance of her role within it. As December brought cooler weather to their Syrian base, the operational tempo increased significantly, bringing new challenges that would ultimately force Martinez to confront the reasons she had left special operations in the first place. Intelligence reports indicated increased activity from Iranian-backed militias in the region, suggesting a coordinated campaign to disrupt American operations before the winter months limited mobility. The threat assessment had been elevated, and additional security measures implemented throughout the area of operations. For Martinez, the heightened threat level brought both professional challenges and personal anxiety. As the unit's logistics coordinator, she was responsible for ensuring that supply lines remained operational despite increased enemy activity. But, as someone with extensive special operations experience, she also found herself being consulted on tactical matters that went far beyond her official duties. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had returned from his extended field assignment, called Martinez into his office for a private meeting. The conversation that followed would prove to be one of the most significant of her military career. "Staff Sergeant, I've been reviewing reports from your convoy rescue operation," Hayes began, gesturing for Martinez to take a seat. "Exceptional work under pressure. But it also raises questions about your background that I think we need to address directly." Martinez had been expecting this conversation since the rescue mission. "Yes, sir." Hayes pulled up her personnel file on his computer and scrolled through several pages before looking back at her. Your official record indicates service with the 75th Ranger Regiment, but it's light on specifics about your actual duties and deployments. The tactical skills you demonstrated during the rescue operation suggest experience that goes beyond standard Ranger training. Martinez considered her response carefully. Much of her service record was classified, but she could see that Hayes was asking for information that would help him understand how to best utilize her capabilities. My assignments with the Rangers included special reconnaissance missions in denied territory, Martinez said finally. Team leadership, direct action operations, and coordination with other special operations units. Hayes leaned forward in his chair. How many combat missions? 43 confirmed missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. Additional operations that remain classified. The number hung in the air between them for a moment. Hayes, despite his own extensive military experience, had never been involved in anything approaching that level of combat operations. And the Silver Star? Hayes asked quietly. Martinez's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Operation in Afghanistan, 2018. My team was conducting reconnaissance on a high-value target when we were compromised by enemy forces. We spent 72 hours surrounded, calling in airstrikes and coordinating with reinforcements. Casualties? 2 wounded, no fatalities from my team. Enemy casualties were significant. Hayes studied Martinez's face, noting the careful way she chose her words and the slight tension around her eyes that suggested painful memories. What brought you to the 82nd Combat Support Battalion? This was the question Martinez had been dreading since her arrival at Fort Braxton. The real reason for her transfer involved experiences that she had never discussed with anyone, memories that haunted her sleep and influenced every decision she made about her military career. Personal reasons, Martinez replied, hoping that Hayes would accept the non-answer. Hayes shook his head. Staff Sergeant, I need to understand what motivated someone with your background and capabilities to request a transfer to a support role. It affects how I can best utilize your skills and what expectations I should have for your performance. Martinez was quiet for several long seconds, wrestling with how much to reveal about experiences that she had spent months trying to process. Finally, she looked directly at Hayes and made a decision about trust. My last mission with the Rangers went wrong, she said quietly. Intelligence failure led to my team being inserted into what turned out to be a trap. We were surrounded by superior forces and had to fight our way out. Casualties? Hayes asked again, his voice gentle. 3 Kia, 2 wounded. I was the team leader. Martinez's voice remained steady, but Hayes could see the pain in her eyes. The mission was supposed to be routine reconnaissance. Instead, it became the worst firefight of my career. Hayes leaned back in his chair, beginning to understand the weight that Martinez carried. Survivor's guilt is common among combat veterans. It doesn't reflect on your leadership or decision-making. Martinez shook her head. It wasn't just survivor's guilt. I made tactical decisions that may have contributed to the casualties. I requested the transfer because I wasn't sure I could trust my judgment in life or death situations anymore. This admission explained everything: why someone with Martinez's qualifications had requested a support role, why she had been reluctant to discuss her background, and why she had initially tried to avoid tactical responsibilities. The convoy rescue mission, Hayes said. How did that feel? Martinez considered the question. Like riding a bicycle. The tactical skills were still there, the decision-making process was automatic. But, afterward, I spent the night analyzing every choice I made, wondering if there was a better way. Hayes nodded, recognizing the self-doubt that often affected experienced leaders who had suffered traumatic losses. The mission was successful. Lives were saved. This time, Martinez replied. But, there's no guarantee that my luck will hold. Hayes studied Martinez for several minutes, weighing what he had learned against the operational requirements of his unit. Finally, he came to a decision that would shape the remainder of their deployment. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to make you an offer. You can continue in your current logistics role, and I'll ensure that your tactical expertise is used only in advisory capacity. Or you can accept a temporary assignment as my tactical operations advisor, with the understanding that it might involve direct mission planning and execution. Martinez looked surprised by the offer. Sir, I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility. The convoy rescue mission suggests otherwise, Hayes replied. But, the choice is yours. Take some time to think about it. As Martinez left Hayes's office, she found herself more conflicted than she had been since arriving at Fort Braxton. The offer represented both an opportunity to fully utilize her skills and a return to exactly the kind of high-stakes decision-making that she had been trying to escape. That evening, she found herself walking the perimeter of the base, thinking about the conversation with Hayes and what it meant for her future. The decision wasn't just about accepting additional responsibilities, it was about confronting the self-doubt that had driven her away from special operations. Master Sergeant Thompson found her near the main gate, looking out at the Syrian landscape that stretched to the horizon. Heard you had a meeting with the colonel today. Martinez glanced at him. Word travels fast on a base this size. Everything okay? Martinez was quiet for a moment before responding. He offered me a position as tactical operations advisor. Thompson whistled softly. That's a significant promotion in responsibility. What did you tell him? I asked for time to think about it. Thompson studied her expression in the dim light from the base security lights. What's holding you back? Martinez had never discussed the real reasons for her transfer with Thompson, but the events of the past few months had built a level of trust between them that made honesty feel possible. My last mission as a Ranger team leader resulted in casualties that might have been prevented, she said quietly. I'm not sure I trust my judgment in tactical situations anymore. Thompson was quiet for several seconds before responding. How many missions did you lead before that one? 42 successful operations. And how many of those saved lives that would have been lost otherwise? Martinez had never calculated that particular statistic. I don't know. Maybe it's time to find out, Thompson suggested. Maybe it's time to focus on all the times your decisions kept people alive instead of the one time things went wrong. As they walked back toward the main base, Martinez found herself thinking about Thompson's words. She had spent months focusing on the mistakes and failures from her last Ranger mission while ignoring the successes that had preceded it. 3 days later, increased enemy activity forced a decision about Hayes's offer. Intelligence reports indicated that militia forces were planning coordinated attacks on American bases throughout the region, with the timing and scale designed to overwhelm available response capabilities. The threat level was elevated to imminent, and all non-essential personnel were restricted to base. But the operational requirements continued, meaning that supply convoys and patrol operations had to proceed despite the increased risk. Martinez found herself in the Tactical Operations Center, working with Major Franklin to coordinate security for a critical medical supply convoy. The route analysis and threat assessment were complex, requiring tactical judgment that went beyond standard logistics planning. The intelligence picture is incomplete, Franklin said, studying the map display. We know there's increased militia activity, but we don't know specific locations or timing. Martinez studied the planned convoy route, applying threat assessment techniques she had developed during her Ranger missions. The route has 3 potential ambush sites, she observed. Here, and here, where the road passes through terrain that favors defenders. How do we mitigate those risks? Martinez considered the tactical options, drawing on experience with convoy security in similar environments. Reconnaissance teams scout each potential ambush site 2 hours before the convoy passes. Aerial surveillance maintains overwatch throughout the route. Quick reaction force positions here to respond to contact. Franklin nodded as Martinez outlined her recommendations. That's a comprehensive security plan. Can you coordinate the reconnaissance teams? Martinez paused, realizing that Franklin was asking her to take operational control of a combat mission. Sir, I'm assigned to logistics, not tactical operations. Colonel Hayes authorized me to utilize your tactical expertise as needed, Franklin replied. This convoy is carrying medical supplies that could save lives if it arrives safely. Your experience with reconnaissance operations could be the difference between success and failure. Martinez looked at the map, studying the convoy route and potential ambush sites. She could see how to minimize risks and maximize the chances of mission success, but accepting tactical responsibility meant confronting exactly the kind of decision-making that had driven her away from special operations. I'll coordinate the reconnaissance, Martinez said finally. But I want Master Sergeant Thompson as my deputy for mission planning. The convoy operation that followed demonstrated Martinez's tactical expertise in a controlled environment that allowed her to rebuild confidence in her decision-making abilities. The reconnaissance teams identified and avoided 2 potential ambush sites, while aerial surveillance detected militia movement that confirmed the threat assessment. The convoy completed its mission without incident, delivering critical medical supplies to forward units that were facing increased casualty rates due to enemy activity. The success was attributed directly to Martinez's tactical planning and execution of security operations. Following the successful convoy mission, Martinez requested a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. The conversation took place in his office the next morning, with Martinez displaying a level of confidence that he hadn't seen since her arrival. Colonel, I'd like to accept your offer to serve as tactical operations advisor, Martinez said without preamble. Hayes smiled. What changed your mind? I realized that my experience and skills can make a difference in keeping soldiers alive, Martinez replied. The convoy mission reminded me why I became a ranger in the first place, to serve alongside the best soldiers in the world and ensure they come home safely. Hayes leaned forward, pleased by both her decision and the confidence he heard in her voice. What about the concerns you had about your tactical judgment? Martinez took a deep breath before answering. I spoke with Master Sergeant Thompson about my combat record. 42 successful missions compared to 1 that resulted in casualties. The odds suggest that my judgment is sound, and that the last mission was an exception rather than the rule. There's something else, Hayes said. Intelligence reports indicate that the militia forces operating in this region are using tactics similar to those you encountered in Afghanistan. Your experience with their methods could be invaluable for protecting our personnel. Martinez nodded. I've been analyzing their recent attacks. The patterns are familiar. They're using terrain and timing to maximize psychological impact while minimizing their own exposure to retaliation. Can you develop countermeasures? Yes, sir. But it will require changes to our operational procedures and additional training for personnel who haven't faced these particular tactics before. Hayes authorized Martinez's new role immediately, recognizing that her expertise was needed more urgently than he had initially realized. Within hours, she was working with the tactical operations team to develop new procedures for convoy security, base defense, and patrol operations. The transformation in Martinez's role was noticed immediately throughout the base. Soldiers who had initially seen her as an outsider now recognized her as someone whose expertise could mean the difference between life and death during their deployment. Private Johnson, who had experienced the panic attack during Martinez's first week at Fort Braxton, approached her after one of her tactical briefings. Staff Sergeant, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done since you arrived. Martinez looked up from the map she had been studying. I haven't done anything that any other NCO wouldn't do in the same situation. That's not true, Johnson replied. You saved the convoy crew with that rescue mission. You've improved our security procedures. And you've helped all of us understand what we're really facing out here. Martinez studied Johnson's face, seeing maturity and confidence that hadn't been there when she first arrived. You've grown a lot as a soldier since we deployed. Because I had good leadership to learn from, Johnson said. I know you didn't want to talk about your background when you first arrived, but I'm glad we know who you really are now." As Johnson walked away, Martinez reflected on how much had changed since her arrival at Fort Braxton. She had come hoping to escape the responsibilities and pressures of tactical leadership, but circumstances had forced her back into exactly the role she had been trying to leave behind. The difference was that this time, she was choosing to accept those responsibilities rather than having them thrust upon her by assignment. The convoy rescue mission and successful security operations had rebuilt her confidence in her abilities while reminding her of why she had chosen military service in the first place. That evening, Martinez received word that her tactical recommendations had been adopted by higher headquarters for use throughout the region. Units across Syria would be implementing security procedures that she had developed, potentially saving lives beyond her own base. Master Sergeant Thompson found her in the Tactical Operations Center, reviewing intelligence reports and updating threat assessments. "Heard your procedures are going army-wide in this theater." Martinez looked up from her work. "They're just common-sense adaptations of techniques that worked in Afghanistan." "Don't minimize what you've accomplished," Thompson said. "You've taken your combat experience and translated it into doctrine that will protect soldiers throughout the region." Martinez leaned back in her chair, looking tired but satisfied. "It feels good to be contributing at that level again." "Any regrets about accepting the tactical advisor position?" Martinez considered the question carefully. "None. I realized that stepping away from leadership responsibilities wasn't going to solve the issues I was dealing with. The only way forward was to confront them directly and find ways to use my experience constructively." As their deployment in Syria continued into the new year, Martinez's role as tactical operations advisor evolved to include training responsibilities for incoming units and coordination with special operations forces operating in the region. Her reputation for tactical excellence and sound judgment spread throughout the theater, earning respect from peers and superiors at all levels. The soldiers of the 82nd Combat Support Battalion completed their deployment with 0 fatalities and minimal injuries, a record that was attributed directly to the security procedures and tactical guidance that Martinez had provided. Her leadership had made the difference between a successful deployment and a potentially tragic one. When the unit returned to Fort Braxton in March, Martinez faced a decision about her future in the Army. Her performance as Tactical Operations Advisor had earned recommendations for promotion and offers of assignment to prestigious positions throughout the military. But she also had to consider what she had learned about herself during the deployment. The experience had proven that she could still function effectively as a tactical leader, but it had also reminded her of the stress and responsibility that came with life-or-death decision-making. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called her into his office for a final evaluation meeting before their redeployment leave began. "Staff Sergeant, you've exceeded every expectation I had when I offered you the tactical advisor position." "Thank you, sir. I've received several inquiries about your availability for other assignments. Special Operations Command wants you back. The War College is offering a teaching position. There's even interest from the Pentagon for strategic planning roles." Martinez had expected these offers, but hearing them confirmed made the decision she faced more real. "What do you recommend, sir?" Hayes studied her for a moment before answering. "I think you should do whatever allows you to use your talents in a way that brings you satisfaction. You've proven that you can function at the highest levels of tactical leadership. The question is whether that's what you want to do." Martinez thought about the past year, the initial attempt to escape tactical responsibilities, the gradual acceptance of advisory roles, and the ultimate return to full leadership duties. "I think I've been running from the wrong thing," she said finally. "Explain." "I thought I was running from the stress of tactical leadership. But what I was really running from was the fear of making another mistake that could cost lives. The deployment showed me that fear can be managed without giving up the responsibilities that define who I am as a soldier." Hayes nodded. "So what's your decision?" Martinez took a deep breath. I'd like to return to special operations, but in a training and development role. Help prepare other soldiers for the kinds of challenges we faced in Syria. Teaching the next generation of tactical leaders? Teaching them to make the right decisions under pressure, and helping them understand that even good leaders sometimes face impossible situations where people get hurt despite their best efforts. Hayes smiled. I think that's an excellent choice. You have the experience and judgment to make a real difference in that kind of role. As Martinez left Hayes's office for the last time as a member of the 82nd Combat Support Battalion, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the 75th Ranger Regiment to Fort Braxton and back toward Special Operations. The woman who had walked into that first formation briefing had been running from her past and uncertain about her future. The woman who was leaving had rediscovered her sense of purpose and found ways to use her experience constructively rather than being haunted by it. The ribbon rack that had initially attracted so much attention remained the same, but its meaning had evolved. The Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart were no longer just reminders of painful experiences, they were symbols of expertise and judgment that could be used to help other soldiers face similar challenges. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Martinez accepted a promotion to Sergeant First Class and an assignment to the Ranger Training Brigade, where she would be responsible for training the next generation of Special Operations leaders. Her curriculum would include not just tactical skills and leadership techniques, but also guidance on managing the psychological challenges that came with high-stakes decision-making. The soldiers who had served with her at Fort Braxton and in Syria would carry forward the lessons they had learned from her leadership. Private Johnson, now a corporal, would use the confidence and tactical awareness he had developed under her guidance to become a successful team leader in his own right. Master Sergeant Thompson would be promoted to Sergeant Major and assigned to a training command, where he would share stories of Martinez's leadership as examples of how experienced soldiers could overcome personal challenges while continuing to serve at the highest levels. The story of Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez had come full circle, from special operations to support duties and back to a role that allowed her to use her experience to develop future leaders. The medals that had first told stories of survival had become symbols of wisdom that could help others navigate their own challenging paths of service. In the end, her greatest achievement wasn't the Silver Star or the successful missions she had led. It was the realization that experience, no matter how painful, could be transformed into something valuable that would benefit others long after her own service had ended. The woman they had first seen as just another new recruit had proven to be exactly what her medals had suggested from the beginning, a soldier whose worth was written in survival, leadership, and the quiet confidence that comes from facing the worst challenges military service can offer and finding ways to emerge stronger rather than broken. Her story would continue, but now it would be told through the soldiers she trained, the leaders she developed, and the lives that were saved by the wisdom she had gained through her own struggles with the weight of command responsibility. Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez had found her true calling not in spite of her combat experience, but because of it. The medals that had once seemed like burdens had become the foundation for a new kind of service that would impact countless soldiers for years to come. The quiet woman who had tried to blend into the background had discovered that some people are meant to lead, regardless of what uniform they wear or what assignment they accept. Her story was proof that the most valuable soldiers are often those who carry the deepest scars, because they understand better than anyone else what it takes to survive, to lead, and to ensure that others make it home safely.